Hey everyone, and welcome to Dominion Cards, the video series where we take a strategic, in-depth look at various cards from the board game Dominion. Today we're looking at Lurker. This is a 2-cost action card from 2nd edition Intrigue, and it says +1 action, choose one, trash an action card from the supply, or gain an action card from the trash. And there's quite a lot going on with this card, so how I'm going to try and structure this video is we're going to try and talk about Lurker in more its general case application, and then we will go on to focus more about particular things you can look for in other cards that make Lurker a lot better. So let's start off with some basic analysis on this card. So each time you play Lurker, you are kind of getting one half of an effect that lets you gain actions non-terminally. So the first time you play it, you pick an action card from the supply and you put it in the trash. And then on the second play, you get to take that card from the trash and put it in your discard pile and gain it. So this usually means that you're looking to play an even number of lurkers each turn. This is because the trash pile is a shared area, and actually anybody can pick it up from the trash once it's gone in there. So this often means that you want multiple lurkers in your deck before you're playing them, or alternatively you've got something like Throne Room that lets you play it twice. Now if you only play one lurker and you leave an action in the trash, there's a big risk associated with doing this because anyone else could just come along with their lurker and pick it up. If you do this, if you play lurker once, put a card in the trash, and then another player comes along and picks it up, then not only have you let your opponent gain a card with just one lurker play, but you've actually completely undone any value that you got when you played your lurker. So it's really bad for you a lot of the time to leave something in the trash because you only played lurker once, right? So you kind of, a big thing with the card is that you want to try and avoid doing exactly this. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you can't get away with only playing one lurker. Sometimes if you pay close attention to your opponent, which ideally is something that you want to be doing anyway, you might be able to notice that your opponent has played their lurkers and that actually maybe you only drew one lurker this turn, but you're likely to see it next turn, and it looks like your opponent isn't because they're not going to see a lurker on the next turn, and that means that you probably can safely get away with playing it. This is something that's, you can't rely on this happening. It will only come up occasionally. I mean, obviously, if your opponent is playing a deck where they draw their entire deck every turn, then this is no good, because you're not going to get a turn next where your opponent isn't going to play it. But, you know, it's not always impossible to get away with just playing lurker once and then losing the card that goes into the trash from that. Another thing that can happen is that you might get multiple turns in a row. So if you play an outpost or if you play a mission, you can probably get away with just playing one lurker because you're going to get the next turn and then hopefully play that one lurker again. So with cards like Outpost, you can technically get away with having one less lurker in your deck. But, you know, it's still taking you 2 turns to actually get a card out of it, right? It's just a lot part of the risk is gone. Now, when do we ever want to open with one lurker? So you might think that, you know, maybe we can get away with picking up a lurker on, for example, a 5-2 split. If you have 2 or 5 in your first turn, then that means in your first 2 turns you've got a 2-card hand. And you might think that, well, you know, what do I want to buy? Maybe buying a lurker is a pretty good idea there. One of the big problems with only getting one lurker in your first 2 turns is that your opponent can kind of counter it by getting their own lurker, but they can wait until turn 3 or 4 to actually pick theirs up. So if you think that you picked up a lurker on turn 1, you won't get to play it until turn 3 or 4, and then you will have an action card in the trash, And then by the time you get to turn 5, it is possible that you will be able to play it again, but if your opponent buys a lurker on 3 or 4, then they also have the opportunity to play one, and they might be able to play a lurker before you. And if that happens, then they're going to take the card, and your opening buy was actually worse than useless because you added a stop card to your deck that didn't do anything. And the thing is that the cards that you buy in your first 2 turns are sort of some of the most important cards that you sometimes add to your deck, and that is because the opening buys are just so important. Not only do you play them more often, but they tend to start setting the pace for the whole game, right? The way that this is why you always want to open like Chapel, for example, on an earlier turn, because it's really important that you start getting the benefit of that card as soon as possible. So you usually opening a lurker on your first 2 turns with the idea that, maybe you won't play it and you'll wait until you get another lurker just because you hit 2. It's really sort of impacting your deck from that point on, the fact that you've added this bad card. So a lot of times just picking up 1 lurker on the first 2 turns is actually a bad idea. And even if your opponent decides to not get their own lurker and effectively let you get that card that you put in the trash and leave it to you, bear in mind that you had to shuffle your deck twice. You had to shuffle your deck on turn 1, on turn 2, then you had to play a lurker, you had to shuffle the second time, then through that shuffle you actually get to play the lurker and gain the card, and then you shuffle for a 3rd time, and then you finally get to actually play the card that you gained. And that means that the eventual payoff of buying that lurker on turn 1 or 2, you've got to wait until somewhere around about like turn 8, in a lot of cases, until you've actually seen a card from that you get to play. And that's a really long time. That's like half of the game has gone already, and you finally got 1 card out of it. I mean, it's going to change. Obviously, if you have like a Chapel, then you're going to be a lot quicker in your shuffles. But, sometimes your opponent doesn't even have to contest you and get their own lurker in order for the lurker to be a bad idea for you. It's really, really slow waiting at the start of the game to get through your shuffles a lot of the time. And so lurkers it's so slow having to wait to play it twice when you're only playing it once per shuffle. So what this means is that lurker kind of really wants you to pair it up with another lurker in your hand. So this means that, of course, once you've got 2 lurkers in your hand, you can guarantee a safe play and that you get to pick up a card that you want. So usually you're going to be taking a look at getting your deck trashed down and drawn first, particularly as lurker takes up 2 stop card spaces. That means it's just a lot harder to draw with it, so you usually want to get the draw first and then focus on supporting lurkers in your deck. There is one exception to this, and that is draw to X engines. They don't necessarily need you to have 2 lurkers in your hand at once, because what you can do is if you draw up 1 lurker, you can play 1, it goes out of your hand and it decreases your hand size, and you put a card in the trash. Then you can keep drawing and hopefully you will find your second, and then you can play that. But usually you are just going to wait until you have 2 lurkers in your hand or a lurker in a throne room until you actually start playing them, just to eliminate the risk. Now, I've talked about the fact that you wouldn't want to get lurker 1 at a time and have only 1 in your opening hand, but sometimes it's okay to actually open with 2 lurkers. So certain cards that combo very nicely with lurker might be so strong that it's actually worth taking the risk just to hope that you draw your 2 opening buys together. The odds are against you because you have a 5-card hand and you've got 12 cards in your deck, so getting 2 of those 12 in your opening 5-card hand or on turn 4 is not the greatest odds in the world. However, if the payoff is big enough, maybe that's a risk that you want to take. So occasionally you will see people buy double lurker when they open, but there's got to be a real reason why you want to do that usually. Like lurker on its own is not some incredible power card if it's not got anything particularly powerful going with it. Now, we've talked a lot here about how you need 2 lurkers because one of them puts a card in the trash and the other one retrieves it. But of course, lurker is not the only card in the game that trashes cards. It is entirely possible that something else could put an action card in your trash. So, for example, let's take a look at Remodel. Now, Remodel, being a cost-relevant trasher, or trash for benefit, as people sometimes call it, it's got a challenge in that it needs a good card to trash in order to actually get the most out of it. And the problem is that the cards that you tend to buy a lot of that are more expensive than your opening cards, they're all like good action cards, and you don't necessarily really want to trash those. But the nice thing about Lurker is that, you know, you can trash your good action cards, and then you can fish them straight out of the trash again with Lurker. So imagine, like with Remodel as a particular example, you know, you really want to be trashing like 6 cost cards so that you can gain a province. But, you know, if the only 6 cost card in your deck is something like Artisan, then the problem is that, you know, you had to buy an Artisan, and now you're getting rid of it. Whereas if Lurker is also on the board, you can trash the Artisan to gain a province. Then you can get the Artisan back and hopefully draw it. And you also still get to play it that turn. So that sort of gets rid of a bunch of the problems that the cost-relevant trashers have in being able to justify trashing that expensive card that you had to buy, because you get to keep it in this case. Now, it's not just cards like Remodel. Some cards actually trash themselves, and Lurker gets to keep them. So watch out in that some cards, when you play them and they leave your deck, they're not actually trashed, like Encampment or Horse. They just get returned to the pile. But some of them, you do actually trash them and they go into the trash. So I've just got some examples here. There are more examples than this, but these are ones that I thought were worth mentioning. So Mining Village is actually in Intrigue. It's a village, and you can trash it, and you can get 2 coins when you play it. It can trash itself. So with Mining Village, if you, let's say, for example, that you played Mining Village for a village, but now you're out of draw and you have 1 lurker in your hand, well, what you can do is you can safely trash the Mining Village and fish it out again. And then the lurker sort of acted like a silver, right? You got this extra 2 coins that turn, and your deck, you know, didn't really look any differently at the end of it. Now, that doesn't mean that if you wouldn't buy a lurker necessarily just to constantly fish the same Mining Village out of the trash over and over, because if you just wanted a stop card that gave you essentially 2 money, you might have been able to just buy a silver instead. But, you know, sometimes the opportunity presents itself, and it can be a good idea to just trash the Mining Village and grab it back. You can potentially play the same Mining Village multiple times if you can keep drawing it. If you trash it and then gain it back and you draw it, you can actually play it again. Pillage is an attack from Dark Ages that when you play it, it trashes itself, and if it did trash itself, it does this quite powerful attack against your opponent. And usually one of the big problems with Pillage is that you have to keep rebuying it if you want to keep using that attack, which is not so great. But with Lurker, you can just gain it back again for free, and that's really nice. You can pillage quite a lot if you've got Lurker around. And Small Castle is this one castle in the castles pile from Empires that can trash itself to pick up another castle from the pile, and it's really powerful in the presence of Lurker because you can effectively gain the rest of the castle pile without having to buy any of them if you manage to pick up the small castle, because you can play it, trash it, pick up a castle, fish the small castle out of the trash and like play it again potentially. And some of the castles at the end get really powerful, but they're also really, really expensive. So not having to buy any of them anymore is just incredibly strong. So definitely watch out for the castle pile when Lurker is available. Of course, sometimes you can get cards that trash your opponent's action cards, and Lurker can sort of feel a little bit like a minor counter to this because it can, fish the cards that got trashed back out of the trash, so you can gain them back again. However, what's more likely, if there's a nice engine going on, is that it actually makes the trashing attack stronger, because your lurker can be played straight after you've trashed an opponent's card to just gain their card out of the trash. Now, not only are you trashing your opponent's cards, but you're effectively stealing them, and you get to keep them instead. And that can be pretty crazy sometimes. It's worth noting that Rogue is one such trashing attack, and it's interesting in that it won't actually attack your opponent if there is something that it can fish out of the trash pile. So what you can do, if there's some action card that's pretty bad on this board and nobody wants it, you might be able to just trash one from the supply and leave it in the trash. Then your opponent's rogue, if they play it, they will gain that action card rather than attack you, and you can sort of actually effectively counter rogues in a game with Lurker by just ensuring that if your opponent tries it, they just junk themselves with these bad action cards that they don't want. I mean, it's not always going to be the case, but do watch out for that. Now, knights are the most notable trashing attack. This is the sort of the trashing attack that everyone remembers and everyone thinks about. Lurker is pretty strong when knights are around. So one of the big deals with the knights is that when you use the trashing attack, your opponent reveals a knight and chooses to trash it, then your knight also gets trashed. So the knights tend to die off pretty quickly. When knights are good, everyone's picking them up, and then they all just kind of die pretty fast. However, lurkers are immune to knights because knights don't trash 2-cost cards. So what you can do is you can just fill your deck with lurkers, and then every time knights get trashed, you can just fish them all back out again. And what this can happen is that the knights are just constantly regained and replayed because your opponent can't really do anything if you're playing a lot of knights and constantly trashing their cards. And you can sort of end up with this game where people just play knights forever. I've actually had a game that just would not end once because me and my opponent were just constantly fishing knights out of the trash over and over and over again. And it was the correct thing to do. And I think eventually my opponent got bored and resigned, and I was pretty bored as well. But that's just how knights tends to go with Lurker sometimes. It's worth noting that Sir Vander has an effect where when he's trashed, you gain a gold. So one thing that was pretty good there was that when you gain back Sir Vander with Lurker, you get to start flooding your deck with golds, which sort of act as a little buffer against your opponent trying to trash your knights, and that sort of helps you slightly build your deck a little bit better. So Sir Vander's a nice one to look out for when you've got a knight and lurker combination. So some cards have an on-gain effect, and that means that it does something when you gain it. And what's nice about Lurker and other cards that can fish cards out of the trash, Lurker's not the only one, is that they allow you to just get the on-gain effect over and over again. So as long as you have some way of trashing these cards, you can essentially just get the on-gain effect continuously throughout the game. So a really nice one, just an example here, is Border Village. It costs 6, but when you gain it, you get to gain a cheaper card. So if you can remodel border villages because they cost 6. You can turn them into a province, and then when you gain it back with Lurker, you also get to gain a 5 or less cost card, which could be like, say, a duchy. And so suddenly Lurker becomes super strong because you're gaining so many cards with it while you're also getting the benefits of trashing the border village. Cavalry is an interesting one in that it draws you cards whenever you gain it. And Cavalry is a card that you will buy, but you don't necessarily want in your deck to play. So again, using some sort of cost-relevant trasher on Cavalry allows you to turn it into something nice, like a nice 5 cost or the gold or whatever. And then you can, if you need some draw at some point and you've got a Lurker in your hand, you can play the Lurker, and it sort of acts a bit like a laboratory because you draw 2 cards as well. Lastly, Silk Merchant here. Whenever you gain or trash it, you get a coffer and a villager. So one of the best bits of Silk Merchant, honestly, is the plus coffer and the villager. So it's really nice to just trash it and gain it over and over again and get a whole bunch of coffers and villagers out of it. Now notice that this has when you gain or trash this and on trash effects are something else as well that Lurker benefits from that we will look at now. So the strongest type of effect generally that a card can have for Lurker to watch out for is an effect which gives you something when you trash it. And that's because Lurker gets those benefits when it trashes it from the supply. And that means Lurker gets to immediately take advantage of those bonus effects. Some of these are particularly important when they show up, and there are some very, very powerful combos with Lurker for cards that have an on-trash effect. So the first one we've got to talk about is Hunting Grounds. Most of these cards, by the way, come from Dark Ages and Renaissance. So Lurker tends to get pretty strong once you're adding one of those expansions into your card pool. But Hunting Grounds Lurker is an incredibly strong, powerful combo. It's actually one of the stronger combos in the entirety of Dominion. So how this works is that Hunting Grounds, when you trash it, lets you gain a duchy or 3 estates. So what you do is you buy only Lurkers, and eventually you're going to buy some estates as well. And what you want to do is you just want to play as many Lurkers as possible, and all you're going to do is trash Hunting Grounds from the supply, and you're going to pick to gain duchies, or when they run out, to gain 3 estates. All you then need to do is buy all the Lurkers and buy 2 estates, and eventually this pile will empty. And that will be 3 piles. You'll have emptied Hunting Grounds, you'll have emptied duchies, and you'll have emptied either estates or Lurkers. And what this means is that the game can end in roughly 11 turns, and you've got about 33 points, which is at least 5 provinces worth of points. So in order to consistently beat this, like your opponent would have to start, like, say, double provincing from turn 8, and that's just not possible on so many boards, right? So this is super difficult to beat, and it's going to be the correct strategy most of the time that it shows up. So you just buy Lurker, trash Hunting Grounds. Now, of course, if you're playing with more than 2 players, you have more than 8 duchies in the supply, you have 12, and you've only got 10 Hunting Grounds. So it doesn't really quite work with more players, and what you would want to do is you would actually want to focus on emptying the estate pile so that you can empty Hunting Grounds, estates, and Lurkers, but that's a lot worse, and it's potentially going to be able to beat it. Remember that when you play this, your opponent's Lurkers, if they're not doing this combo, suddenly just start gaining them Hunting Grounds, the ones that you've trashed for them. So, you know, that helps the engine. However, it's still very difficult because this earns so many points so quickly to actually beat it. So this is the real combo that you want to watch out for. Anytime there's Lurker and Hunting Grounds, most of the time you're just going to do this pretty boring to execute strategy, and it's going to completely stomp anything else that is available on that board. Fortress is another really cool one. So this is a village, and anytime you trash it, you put it straight into your hand. So when Lurker trashes one from the supply, it immediately jumps into your hand, and you can play it straight away. So you only need 1 Lurker play to essentially gain the village. Now, it's important to note that this technically never counts as being gained when you do it this way, because it just says to put it into your hand. It doesn't say to actually gain the card. And so that's our way for a card to enter your deck without it ever technically counting as being gained, and that's only ever going to matter for some very, very particular interactions, like, say, the event Triumph from Empires that gains you points based on how many cards you gained that turn, or something like Commerce that gains you a gold for every differently named card that you gained on a turn. Well, the Fortress, watch out, because it wasn't actually technically gained, and so it won't count towards those sorts of things. Cultist, this is an incredibly powerful card on its own, but with Lurker it becomes even stronger because it says when you trash this, draw 3 cards. This means that Lurker is immediately a non-terminal smithy, at least until the Cultist pile empties. Now, Cultist is a pretty good card in general, so you're happy to then gain them and start playing them anyway, because it's a powerful junking attack. And what's really nice is that because your Lurker that trashes the Cultist gets to draw 3 cards, it's actually a lot easier to pair up your Lurkers, and so you can safely gain the Cultist back out of the trash. So sometimes you're going to want to open double Lurker when Cultist is available, just to gain those Lurkers really, really fast, and cycle your deck super quickly and start playing them really fast. In a lot of games that have Cultist, unfortunately, the best strategy is going to be just playing as many Cultists as you can, as quickly as you can, because it just delivers junk so fast to your opponent. Squire and Catacombs are interesting in that they, like Border Village, gain you cards when you trash them. So Border Village, of course, is when you gain it, but with Lurker it feels slightly equivalent. What's interesting here is that Lurker means that these can start gaining you cards straight away. So with Catacombs, when you trash it, you immediately gain a card costing 4 or less. So Lurker sort of ended up like a cheaper Ironworks. But also your next Lurker play then has a Catacombs available to pick up as well, which is really nice. Squire is very interesting in that it immediately gains any attack card, and there are some attack cards that are also really good engine components, particularly Scrying Pool, because it's nice to not have to get a potion and still gain Scrying Pools, but also cards like Minion or Rabble, and there's a couple more as well, but there's a number of good engine components out there that are attacks, and you want to watch out for that with Squire, because you can gain them very quickly with Lurkers by just trashing the Squires straight from the supply. Rats is much less powerful, but it's worth mentioning anyway. When you trash a rats from the supply, Lurker sort of acts like a cantrip. It just draws you a card. And that's nice if you only draw one of your Lurkers and you want to keep playing your turn. So, you didn't have any draw left. You can just sort of throw away the Lurker play and just keep drawing past it, essentially. This one's not super powerful and it'll only appear opportunistically, but it's worth realising that it's there when this combo is available. Flag Bearer from Renaissance is interesting in that the flag that it gives you, if you have it, you draw an extra card at the end of your turn, so you essentially have like a 6-card hand next turn. You usually want the flag, it's really good, but the problem is that the Flag Bearer card itself is a terminal silver, which is really, really bad to actually have in your deck. And with Lurker, you can get the flag without actually having to put a Flag Bearer in your deck, which is really nice. So that's enough of particular on-trash combos. There was a lot of them, but I thought it was worth going through all of them. There was also Silk Merchant, but we already mentioned that one. Just because Lurker just is so strong with them. But what about cards that don't have these particular effects on them? What sort of cards make a Lurker better? Well, Lurker doesn't care about the cost of a card. It only cares that it is an action. And what that means is that Lurker tends to get better if there are cards that are really, really expensive that you want a lot of, or if there are cards with unusual types of cost. So an example of a really, really expensive card that is very good with Lurker is King's Court. Now, King's Court makes everything really good when paired up with it, and King's Court combined with Lurker is going to be really powerful because you get to play the Lurker 3 times. But it's also really nice in that you don't have to try and hit 7, which is actually a very expensive price point and hard to hit. So Lurker, I would open double Lurker sometimes when King's Court is available, right, just to get those King Courts as soon as possible. Possession, this is a very notable combination with Lurker. So Possession is just so expensive and it costs potion, and like all potion cost cards, you don't need to buy a potion when Lurker's around, because you can just gain them. I mean, not every potion cost card is an action, but the ones that are, you can just avoid paying potion at all. Possession is also pretty interesting in the way that it gives you an extra turn, essentially. So what you can do, if it's your turn, or you know that there's basically going to be a possession turn that you're playing next, this is one of those situations where it can be safe to leave a card in the trash, because you will have another turn next and you might be able to gain it. You may be playing with your opponent's deck, but any cards that you gain while they are possessed will actually go to you. City Quarter, this is just an example of a very expensive card that costs debt, and the nice thing with Lurker is that you get to gain these cards without actually taking on any debt at all. So instead of having to pay 8 money for City Quarter eventually, you can gain it without having to pay anything at all, which is really nice. And lastly, just an example, Grand Market. While this does cost 6, it has this extra clause that you can't buy it if you have any coppers in play, but Grand Market, sometimes you can just gain it, and that clause only applies for buying it. So Lurker is a way to gain Grand Markets and therefore avoid this annoying restriction on how to get it. And it's really nice if you can gain Grand Markets pretty quickly, because it's a pretty strong card. So you want to watch out for cards like this. This is not all of them. These are just some examples about how really expensive cards go well with Lurker. Now, that's enough about other particular cards. Here's another aspect of Lurker that is actually really important, and that is the way that it gives you incredible pile control for 3-pile endings when you want to end the game that way. And that is because while we've been talking all this time about wanting to play a Lurker twice to actually get anything, when you just want to empty supply piles, you can just trash them from the supply pile with Lurker and then just not gain them back. So if you think that someone has, say, 2 Lurkers in their deck, normally you would think that they're looking to gain 1 card every turn from that. But as soon as they don't care about gaining more action cards and they want to look to end the game as quickly as possible, that suddenly turns into being able to remove 2 cards from a supply pile. So essentially the Lurkers are almost lowering the pile at double speed compared to how quickly they were lowering it before. So you've got to watch out for that. It means that sometimes the end of the game is a lot closer than you think when you have Lurker. And there are many cases I've seen where you want Lurker for that end game pile control more so than you care to actually start gaining things. This could be because it's just taken a long time for you to get your deck under control, and gaining cards at this point isn't quite as useful as basically getting that end game control to end the game in a favourable position for you. So players will start buying Lurkers just so they can start trashing things to lower the piles. So it's very good at doing that, and this is just a powerful thing that it can do. You don't have to just do this at the end of the game, of course. If you have split piles, which are a concept mostly in Empires, but Knights are technically a split pile as well. These are piles of cards that have different cards in them, and sometimes, particularly the ones in Empires, you have this cheap action at the top that isn't necessarily very good, and then you've got something much more powerful underneath. And what you can do with Lurker is you can just start trashing the cards at the top that you don't want. So maybe you want to trash catapults to get at rocks for whatever reason, or more likely you want to be trashing gladiators to get at the fortunes, or you want to trash the patricians because Emporium is really nice and will start earning you points, just as examples, right? So Lurker can help you do that. There's also like Sauna Avanto. If you just want the draw card from Avanto, you can just trash the Saunas. You just don't buy them, just get rid of them. And maybe you can pick some up later. But, you know, that's just the way that it can blast through those piles can be really important sometimes. Necromancer, this gets its own slide because this is an unusual card that works interestingly with Lurker, and it's sort of the same. Lurker is not the only card that can gain from the trash. There is Rogue and there is Grave Robber, both from Dark Ages, but Lurker's pretty interesting in that it's non-terminal, so you tend to be able to pull off these sort of things a lot easier with Lurker. It's also really cheap. So when you have Necromancer on the board, there are these 3 zombie cards, and they actually are action cards, and they start in the trash. And there's only one copy of each of these. So if you open with a Lurker, you can just pick up those zombies straight away on your first play. And sometimes this could be really important, particularly in the case of Zombie Mason, as this trashes a card off the top of your deck, and in some boards, Zombie Mason might be the only way to trash your starting cards. And if it's important, even though Zombie Mason's not great for like trashing coppers and estates, if it's the only way to do it, then it might be that gaining a Lurker just to be the only player who gets to play Zombie Mason can actually be a critically important thing that you want to do. So watch out for that one, right? That you can lose the game by turn 3 if you don't realise this is important and you don't grab the Zombie Mason and get a Lurker at the start. In addition to that, Necromancer likes having action cards in the trash so that it can play them, and Lurker makes it very easy. If you have one Lurker in your hand and a Necromancer, you might decide to put a card in the trash, play it with Necromancer, and then maybe you can continue your turn and you get to gain it with another Lurker, and then you can play it a second time now that it's in your deck. So Necromancer is just quite interesting with Lurker sometimes, so that's another card to watch out for. Just some last point that I think is important, because some cards only care that you trash something. So Sewers from Renaissance and Tomb from Empires, these give you an effect when you trash a card, and these work with Lurker even though you're trashing a card from the supply. But Market Square specifically says when one of your cards is trashed. So Market Square actually doesn't work when you trash from the supply. So just be careful with the wording of certain things if you're trying to take advantage of that. Depending on how the card is worded, it may or may not actually combo with Lurker. So that was a pretty long video, so just to summarise some final points. Lurker is very strong in the presence of certain combos. While I try to avoid speaking too much about combos in these videos, the reality is that Lurker really cares a lot about particular combos. A large part of its strength is that it needs to be in the presence of things that make it really good. So it's largely a combo card. It does this gaining thing when it's available, but it's not very good at it. So really, Lurker is a card more so than many others where you're really looking for these specific combos to show up, and that's why we've spent so long talking about them in this video. Outside of combos, you need to really be drawing pretty well before you can consider playing it, just because the action cards can get stolen by your opponent, and then you're helping your opponent and making things much worse for you. Now, one of the problems with this is that it takes a while to get your deck under control. So while non-terminally gaining any action card might sound really good, it might actually be quite a while until you can actually start making use of Lurkers. And generally, the later you wait to pick up a gainer, the worse it's going to get. So sometimes Lurker can be too weak to be useful just because it's going to take so long until you feel like you can actually gain a Lurker and start playing it. The fact that it is 2 stop cards in order to gain this bonus is a big problem for Lurker as well. It's just stop cards in general are pretty bad. And the fact that you need to support 2 just to sort of get this effect that you want is particularly bad. In a lot of cases, stop card space is often at a premium and is usually one of the biggest problems that you have. So having to use up an extra 1 just so you can support multiple Lurkers and actually take advantage of it is a big disadvantage for Lurker. It's why it gets to be so cheap despite what it does. It's because of the stop card problems, really. So that was Lurker. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the online client and we're going to generate some kingdoms that have Lurker in it, and we're going to assess its viability for the kingdom. Now, you'll notice that a lot of the combos that we talked about were for expansions beyond Intrigue, so it doesn't really have that many combos with the base cards and Intrigue cards. So, it might get a lot better if we go so far as to do other later expansions. You might see Lurker showing up being a bit more useful, is what I'm trying to say. What's going on here? So we have Replace, which can trash other cards, which might be quite nice, possibly. Let's see. We don't have Village, do we? No, there's no village, and this is a problem. It's a shame because we've got bridge, but that's no good without a village. We do have non-terminal drawing. We've got Wishing Well and we've got laboratory, and that's okay. The fact that Lurker is non-terminal is really nice because there is no village. But what's the stop card that we want to play? Might it be Baron? There, I noticed that the only trashing is Replace, and that means that even Laboratory and Wishing Well aren't necessarily going to do so well. It could be that the best thing to do on this board is actually just Courtyard Big Money, because we can't trash. The drawing is not super great, in all honesty, because we can't trash, and there's no village to actually play these cards that we want. So I think I'm just going to do Courtyard Big Money, and we certainly don't need Lurker in that sort of game because Courtyard is really cheap. And there's no action cards that we really want. I don't think you wouldn't get a Lurker just to like try and gain some labs if you're not going for the engine generally. And I think that's going to outpace anything because Courtyard Big Money is actually pretty fast. As far as big money things go, it's a really, really good big money enabler. So, yep, I think that's just Courtyard Big Money because there's no village, mainly. So it's a shame. It could have been a pretty cool kingdom if there was a village there. Seemed to be quite a lot going on. How about this one? So we have Diplomat and Throne Room as pretty awkward villages, but we've also got Torturer, and Torturer is going to be super good here. Is it going to be super good? Well, we've got Upgrade to Trash, and that's about it for trashing. I think Torturers is going to be pretty important, actually. Yeah, we want to get that Torturer chain off. We want to slow down our opponent's ability to clean their deck by forcing them to gain these curses and trash those instead. So what are we going to do? Is there anything good with Lurker? Well, it's got Upgrade to trash things and gain them back again. Artisan is also a really expensive card that seems quite nice. I do like Workshop here as the main gainer, though, because it's got all these nice cards, Secret Passage, Throne Room, Diplomat, that we're going to want a bunch of. Throne Room and Secret Passage in particular, I think that's pretty nice combination. Throne Room's very good here, I think. It's going to be a way better village than Diplomat, but Diplomat's fine. Actually, Diplomat's quite nice in that if your opponent tortures you, you do get to use it as a village. So I think I'm actually going to open... Well, am I going to choose Diplomat over Baron just because I think Diplomat's better in the long term? I mean, Baron's all right here, honestly. You should be able to draw your deck, and it might help you get an Artisan, so actually, yeah, I think Baron is the real opener here. And I'm going to open a silver just to maximise that chance. If I could get a 6, that's really good. If I can't, it would be really nice to get, for example, 2 5s, in which case I can consider like 2 upgrades to get thinning quickly. So yeah, we want to try and make this a nice combination between getting village-style components, getting our draw, but also trashing first. I don't think we open Workshop. I guess it's tempting, but I really don't want to start the game by picking up Throne Rooms and having these bad collisions. I think I might look to get a Workshop from turn. If I hit 3 on turn 3 or 4 onwards, I'll probably get it then. I don't think I'll open with it. But maybe, especially not if I'm opening Baron as my other opener, I think. So, yeah, I'm going to do that. Will I eventually get a Lurker on this board? I think Lurker is actually fine here. But in reality, it's going to be a lot less useful than just using Workshop, I think, because I sort of want to focus on getting the draw up first, but I do need these cards, and Workshop's just a lot easier to support earlier on. But Lurker, I can see that Lurker actually can be quite good once our deck is under control to pick one up, to start doing things with spare upgrade plays. We can probably start like trashing spare secret passages into more upgrades or into torturers, and eventually maybe turn some torturers or upgrades into artisans, and we can fish them back out of the trash, and we can build up like that. Maybe we turn upgrades into golds and then we gain the upgrades back. That could be the way that we gain money once we've got our deck under control. So maybe I pick up one Lurker just to enable upgrade, to like give us golds and keep the upgrade. So I guess that's what I'm doing here with Lurker. I think for general purpose gaining, I prefer Workshop, but I do like the combination with a trash card for Lurker here. So here I notice straight away we have Chapel to do a lot of powerful trashing. We do have Festival combined with Minion, which is a sort of a draw to X, and that's going to be quite nice, I think. So we can trash down pretty quick. And I do also like Lurker with the draw to X. It's pretty nice. It goes pretty well with Minion, actually. So I think we can open... Do we open Chapel Lurker and we just plan to use Lurker to start gaining festivals and minions? I mean, it's possible. It could be that we plan to never actually buy any treasure in this game and we just plan to flood our deck with Lurkers and minions and festivals and gain a load of cards that way. Eventually the Lurkers could just gain us nobles for points as well, so I think I like having a lot of Lurkers. Only challenge here is that Swindler can turn Lurkers into estates, which is real bad. And it can turn these nice cards that we get into trading posts, which we really don't want. Or possibly, is Bandit even worse than trading post? No, trading post's got to be real bad in the presence of Chapel and Minion. So I think we've got to get in Swindler plays. So I think I don't care to open Swindler because obviously, it's super bad if we hit their Chapel, but it's a real risky play. But we do eventually want a Swindler. I think I much prefer Chapel Lurker. But that makes your opponent opening Swindler more likely to hit one of those. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we open Chapel Lurker and we just want to buy Lurkers until we start gaining these, and we will pick up a Swindler at some point. I just think it's better to spend the terminal action on Chapel, and then eventually when we're no longer playing Chapel, we can pick up a Swindler. We might have to keep some money around and buy it at some point, and then we're just going to try and gain these. So I think Lurker's very strong here, just because we want these cards, and when you consider that one of the issues with Chapel is that you don't get to buy anything on the turns where you play it, it's kind of nice that we have Lurker to gain stuff potentially while we then Chapel away 2 other cards or something. And the fact that it's non-terminal is really nice. The fact that it works well with draw to X, and this is sort of a draw to X board, is really nice. I guess you can do Village Nobles as a way to draw and use Bandit as payoff, but given that we want to be playing festivals anyway for our economy, and Minion is also an annoying attack on our opponent, and we're not at risk of losing money as well from their opponent's bandits if we are going completely treasureless. I think I like that. I think we can get a pretty good deck going pretty fast here, and once we've got a deck that can play Lurkers really well, which this deck is going to be able to do, we can start trying to gain points with nobles. And I think not having to buy the nobles is a real point in Lurker's favour here, because you don't really want to... It's tough to buy nobles, they're so expensive. So I really like Lurker here. I think Lurker's very strong. I think we actually open with one with no plan to actually play it on the first shuffle, because we don't really care to play anything other than Chapel after the first shuffle. We just want to trash, and we just want to then start buying more Lurkers. And we're going to be able to collide them pretty quick, just because Chapel's going to get our deck thin very quickly. What do we have here? So we've got a lot of trashing. We've got Trading Post, we've got Steward, we've got Masquerade. For villages, we've got Shantytown and Village. We have Council Room for draw, which is, I guess it is what it is. We've got Conspirator, that's also really good. Given that Council Room's giving us buy, actually I do like playing a lot of Conspirators and then maybe some Council Rooms. It does set up our opponents nicely if we are drawing them with Council Room to play their own Conspirators, but I think that's fine. Workshop's really nice here in the presence of regular villages and also Conspirator. I do want to gain as many villages as possible so we can set off these Conspirator turns, but honestly Lurker's nice in the fact that it's a non-terminal action, helps us to kick off Conspirator chains as well. However, I don't like Lurker that much here compared to Workshop, because I really don't want to play many Council Rooms if I can help it. I think... Do I start off by opening You see, I don't care about either of these 5-cost cards on this kingdom. I only care about Council Room, but I can gain these with Workshop. Workshop's really important here. I want to open with a Workshop, but I also want to open with the Trasher. And I think that's going to be Steward, just to trash as quickly as possible. I want to get my deck to the state where I'm playing as many Conspirators as possible, as quickly as possible. And eventually I might be able to play Stewards for more money, combined with Villages as well. In fact, Steward is draw. I just realised I don't actually need to play Council Room, but I do want at least one Council Room for a buy, which I could just purchase at some point. So I think I ignore Lurker here. I think stock card space is kind of at a premium. I really want to be playing Workshop instead. I've got good village support to play Workshop. The fact that Lurker's non-terminal is not quite as important. So yeah, I think I ignore Lurker over Workshop because Workshop's just... It's just nicer, it's safer. We're not getting our deck under control very quickly, so the safer play of Workshop is a lot better for us there. And this is the last one, so we have Masquerade to thin. This is another bridge board where we don't actually have Village to go with it. So, So it's not a bridge board, basically. What can we do here? So Masquerade's going to be really strong no matter what. I think even if we go for a more money-based strategy, I really like having a Masquerade, so we're going to open with that. And do we go... I think I prefer Masquerade Silver, because eventually we might be able to get, say, a Merchants. If we go for Silver, we might draw the Silver with Masquerade, is always a risk. So I think I prefer it over Poacher in this case. Now I note that we can't play Courtier non-terminally unless we have a moat in our deck, which we can probably eventually do. But I think Bridge is going to be, once we start getting thin, actually we'd really like to have a Bridge to play instead to get an extra buy. That's going to be quite nice. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to open Masquerade Silver. We're going to look to gain a bunch of laboratories. We will pick up a bridge at some point, and eventually we're just going to have this deck where we're going to try and cycle through it with cantrips. So we're going to have merchants, we're going to have conspirators, and we're eventually going to build up just enough to start picking up like double province, and we go for that. And I think that's what our deck is. So we're going to want to... I don't like Lurker here because of the stock card space is at a premium. If Laboratory is going to be the main way that we are increasing hand size, we want to avoid having as many stock cards as we can. So having a Masquerade, having a Bridge, and everything else. No, we don't want any other stock cards except provinces, ideally. So we're going to wait on the Bridge for a while because we're going to have Masquerade that we're going to be playing for a long time as our only terminal, I think. So, yeah, I think we ignore Lurker here. We just want to... I guess we don't care about getting super thin, actually, even with Masquerade. Maybe if it looks like we're getting to the stage where we can start double buying Laboratory, if we have Bridge, we might pick up a Bridge and start double gaining labs just to prepare ourselves. I think building to double province is probably fine, just because we have, like, Conspirator. And also Bridge helps us not need quite as much money, which sort of helps going for Conspirator Merchant. I guess that's going to be better than doing something like Smithy Big Money, which I guess is the only other main alternative here. I don't like Smithy Big Money if my opponent is, I guess, giving me more estates with Masquerade, but no, I don't think that actually matters that much. I think I prefer the Cantrip Kingdom here with Laboratories over going like Smithy Big Money, but in either of those strategies, I do not really care that much about Lurker. If, for some reason, my draw is going super well, I could probably consider using a Lurker as a Laboratory gainer, but I just don't think there's time for that. I don't think our deck's going to be thin enough to really get in enough. Also, we've got to get 2 of them, so we're going to have to buy 2 of them at some point just to start gaining the labs. I'd rather just buy the labs directly. I think we're going to have plenty of money throughout the game, so affording this isn't going to be a problem. So I think we skip Lurker here. Whew, well, there you go. That was Lurker. This is a pretty complicated card. It's one where you just sort of got to recognise certain other cards are being available sometimes, and it's for something that doesn't has a pretty simple thing going on. It's pretty tough, actually. Its power swings very wildly, so you've really got to watch out for it. Anyway, that was the Lurker video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.